By the time you're considered for a promotion, there's usually already a shared understanding among the decision makers about who you are. That understanding is developed long before any type of formal conversation has taken place. It's developed through all the meetings that you have attended and led, the routine decisions that you handled, the way that you responded under pressure, and even the level of consistency you demonstrated over time. Altogether, those repeated behaviors shape how you are perceived. You are building that perception every single day. And often you're not fully recognizing how much it's influencing what becomes available to you next in your career. Welcome to Control Your Career. I'm Julia Toothacre, your strategic career consultant, and I'm so glad that you're here. This season is all about career leverage, how your career evolves once credibility is established and you're ready for more strategic positioning. In the last episode, we talked about internal capability and skills. In this episode, we are talking about how those capabilities are experienced by other people. We are going to look at reputation, how it forms, where it can be misrepresented, and what it looks like to manage it without becoming performative. We all know those people. Yeah, let's get into it. So how does reputation actually form? This is a really interesting conversation to have because I think that reputation can be formed in many ways. But one of the main ways that reputation is formed is through repeated behavior. People understand patterns. They understand when they see you doing the same thing over and over again, even if it's just slightly different. That is what creates a level of trust, and then that moves into the reputation that is formed. So anytime that somebody notices patterns about your behavior within work, they are coming to conclusions about who they believe you to be as a professional. And there's a lot to be said about what truly forms your reputation. I think some people would argue that there are certain moments that form your reputation, and I think for some people that's true. I think when there are really big wins that we have in an organization or a really good strategic conversation that we have, I think that that can help build your reputation, but usually there are multiple factors that are coming into it. And so people, again, are recognizing patterns. They're recognizing what you're bringing to the table and the experience that you have to build on that reputation. I think that there was a time where intelligence built trust, and I think in a lot of organizations and certain sectors, that is absolutely true. Your level of knowledge is absolutely going to drive your reputation. I see that a lot in, higher education. The more intelligent you are, the better, professorship you get and more people listen to you, right? But that's not always the case for most people. I think for a lot of people, their reputation builds more because of trust, and it builds because of those patterns. It builds because of those consistent ways that they treat people or how they follow through in the work that they do. There's a lot of things that shape our reputation, but I think that that consistency in many ways will work in most people's favor over intelligence. But again, doesn't mean intelligence wouldn't play a factor. For many people, understanding how to work within tension and change, that can build a reputation very quickly. We talked about that a couple of episodes ago. The ability to step into a situation and command whatever is going on, not in an arrogant way, but just being able to make decisions, quickly step in, do all of that. It can absolutely build your reputation. And yes, routine work is good. The day-to-day is really good. But I think the people that are able to step in under crisis, they're the ones where their reputation is going to compound very quickly because they're able to step in a crisis and do really good work. And then these days, your reputation is built by your online presence. There are positives and negatives to this. There are a lot of people who use outlets like LinkedIn, but there are other social media sites to build their professional presence. And some have been very successful with it, and it works really well for them. Some people use social media in other ways. They use it for a side hustle. They use it to complain. They use it for whatever they want to. What has to be understood here is your reputation is going to build on whatever you put out into the world. Whether that's positive or negative, somebody is going to look at your social media online presence if they find it, and they are going to make a judgment of you. And so you have to understand what you are putting out into the world and the potential negative or positive impact that can have on you. So we definitely want to think about our online presence and what that means. I know a lot of people want to be very free with what they talk about, and that is 100% your choice, but you have to understand that there can be potential impacts to that, and it might be negative when it comes to your career. So one thing I want you to ask yourself is, if your name came up in a discussion among leadership, whatever your closest leadership group is to you, what are the words or phrases that they would use to describe you? How well do they know you? How well do they know the work that you've done? What do you believe your reputation is in their eyes? And I want you to be really honest about that with yourself, okay? One thing to remember is that reputation is not neutral. This is a topic that I think is going to be hard for some people to really come to terms with, but we have to talk about it. So much of our reputation is shaped by context. It's influenced by culture, power, bias. You've heard me talk about this on past episodes. I've had experts on to talk about this. It doesn't mean that you can't control what's going on, but sometimes people come with their own understandings, their own biases toward you because you represent something to them. It's not good or bad. It just is. It can be bad, but it can be good. And so we have to understand what that is in the situation that you are in. When we think about reputation, a lot of times we think about communication. And one of the examples of bias in communication that I think is very prevalent, and not only have I dealt with it in my career, but I've worked with a lot of clients who have dealt with it, is how communication is interpreted between people. I am somebody who is a very direct communicator. I am also a female. In certain environments, that was taken very negatively. People saw me as aggressive. They felt like I was not a team player because I was being direct and I was holding people accountable to things. In that particular environment, those people did see me as aggressive. Was I aggressive? I did not believe I was being aggressive, but that culture said that I was. When I switched into a different culture and communicated the same way, it was praised. It was something that actually worked to my advantage in terms of my leverage within the organization. And I was able to do more things because people appreciated how direct I was and how I didn't sugarcoat everything in terms of my communication. So you want to think about that in the context of your situation. If you communicate a certain way and somebody else communicates the same way, are you both getting the same feedback? I would imagine for many people, you're not. Sometimes that can be different. And that's part of the bias that we're talking about here, that your reputation might be that people see you as a female and aggressive, even though they see a male who spoke the same way and they see him as a leader. And I know some of you are going to roll your eyes and say, Julia, like that's not really a thing. It absolutely is a thing. It absolutely is a thing. I have dealt with it. My clients deal with it. And so these are the things that when we're talking about reputation, sometimes we don't always have control. Could I have changed the way that I said things? Sure. But honestly, in most spaces, it wouldn't have mattered. In that environment, I'm almost 6 feet tall. I'm 5'11". I'm a female. I'm not a small person. So my presence already in a room influences my reputation because people see me a certain way. And then I open my mouth and I sound a certain way to them, and that's how they're going to view me. So we have to think about how we are reflected by other people. I am very aware of that. I know what I look like in rooms. Doesn't mean I like it, but I've been on the receiving end of it and I understand. All right. Think about the difference between an introvert and an extrovert in a meeting. Introverts tend to be more quiet. They take in more information. Extroverts tend to speak first. There's no right or wrong there. It doesn't mean that one is disengaged and what one isn't. But depending on what the room values, depending on what the culture values, depending on what the leadership values, will depend on how those people are perceived. So often introverts are perceived as disconnected because they take time to think through what's going on, or they were not given the information ahead of time where they could have thought through things in a different way. And so it takes them time to actually warm up to what is going on in the situation. Now, that is sometimes to their detriment because there are people who preference extroversion, who see what's going on, they make connections quickly, and they respond. So there's positives and negatives to all of that. Somebody who's an extrovert, they might respond too quickly without thinking about the alternatives and thinking about how it's going to impact. So it's not right or wrong. It's not this one's better, this one's worse, but it's understanding when you walk into situations, your reputation is going to be shaped partially by who you are and how you show up and what the culture and the leadership respond to. I know when it comes to ambition, in some cultures, ambition is seen as something that is a positive and it positively impacts your reputation. In other cultures, some that I have been a part of, ambition is not rewarded. Ambition is seen as a negative. It's seen as, why are you pushing on this? Just be happy for what you have, right? And so a lot of times reputation can be impacted because we're not in the right spaces to appreciate who we are, and then it negatively impacts our reputation. And then, of course, I have to say the obvious: gender, race, age, your accent, sometimes your background, your religion, your political affiliation, all of these things can influence how you are perceived in the workplace and can influence your reputation, sometimes in a positive way and sometimes in a negative way. So you have to understand, what is that in the organization that you're in? What is that with the leadership? And for some of you, that's a hard conversation to have because you know that there's bias there that's illegal. You know that there's bias where there shouldn't be bias. And so I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of how to detect that. I have an episode where we talk about that a little bit deeper, but you have to understand your reality and how that is going to influence and how it has influenced your reputation. For some of you, you need to leave. You need to be in a different organization. You need to be with a different leader that appreciates what you bring to the table and doesn't hold things against you that you likely cannot control. All right? Organizational culture is huge. It's going to reward what it rewards. And so the more that you understand that and you understand the positioning that gets rewarded within the organization, the better that you're going to be able to succeed or fail within that organization. And I hate to say that. I wish that things were a little bit more fair, but they're not. People have perceptions and your reputation is built around that. Okay. So what are some things that we can reflect on for this? Because I know, again, this is a touchy subject and some of you are just thinking about it for the first time. Some of you have been living it for a long time and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So some questions to reflect on. Is feedback you've received consistent across different managers, or does it vary depending on who's evaluating you? So if you're receiving consistent feedback, then chances are that's pretty clear what your reputation is. If it's been different, then there might be some other external factors influencing your reputation, and that you have to deal with that with the specific manager. Are you being evaluated against clear standards or against personality expectations? We have all heard about the personality hires. That is something that went around social media and is still something I see today. That's very real. Some people are hired specifically for their personality, not for their output. It's not good or bad. It just is. And you have to understand if you're being reviewed against that, because for some of you, you're not going to meet those personality expectation standards, and then you're going to be treated differently. So it's really looking at how is everybody being treated, and are they being treated fairly when it comes to evaluations. Are you adjusting your behavior strategically, or are you changing yourself to fit? I did this for many years. I changed my behavior because of the environment that I was in, and I knew that different behavior was rewarded better. I hated it. It led to burnout. It did not work out well for me. I do not recommend it. So some of you need to take a step back and go, am I being authentic? Am I being myself, or have I changed myself because of the work context and the culture that I'm currently in? And then finally ask yourself, is this a skill issue, a perception issue, or an environment issue? Right? When it comes to reputation, it's going to hit one of those things. And so being able to take a step back and go, okay, I see the gap here, I see the gap here, or I understand where I have control and where I don't, then that's going to help you be able to move forward a little easier when it comes to building or possibly rebuilding your reputation. You have to remember that you can only influence your behavior. You cannot influence other people. You do not have control over other people's behavior and over their bias. And so we have to be realistic about what is going on and then figure out the next best steps for you depending on the situation. Okay, let's talk about gaps. There are gaps in our reputation generally between what we are intending and what the actual experience is. And so this is where I see a lot of professionals fall into, oh, I have a good reputation, but I'm not getting promoted. Oh, I work really well with people, but I'm not being asked to be on this project. So people think that they have a good reputation because they're doing certain things, but then the actual experience doesn't quite add up, okay? So this goes into the idea that you might not be known for the thing that you think that you're known for. And so we have to figure out what that looks like. So just because you have really good intentions does not mean that your intention is having the impact that you want it to have. So we have to control that narrative a little bit more, okay? Sometimes people who are really independent can have some issues with reputation. And that's because they are choosing to work independently versus working on a team. And in team environments, they become very disconnected. And so that's the reputation that they're known for, even if their work is really high quality. We've talked about this over and over again. Just because you produce good work does not mean that anybody knows, does not mean that it's impacting your reputation in a positive way, it does not mean that it's increasing your leverage. So you have to understand what levers to pull when it comes to this so that your reputation is positive, right? And some of you are ignoring it because you don't want to play the game, quote unquote. But it's really not about playing the game. It's about being intentional with the messaging, right? And again, just because you are intentional does not mean it's going to happen. So we have to be really aware of that. I think a lot of times my clients who are really detail oriented and a little more on the IC route, individual contributor route, they are the ones that I see struggle with this a little bit more because they're so narrow in their focus and they just want to do their job and they want to show up, do their job and leave. I love that. If you are somebody that's like that, cool. Love that for you. But that means that you are negating the strategic thinking that you need in order to position yourself well and have the right reputation to get you to where you want to be in your career. If you are where you want to be, then this is a moot point. We don't need to talk about it. But if you want more, if you want to move ahead, then you have to be building those pillars of your reputation in order to move forward. And it has to be strategic thinking. We can't be so narrow in our work that we forget what's going on around us and we don't show up well to the different things that are going to influence that reputation. Okay, so one of the things that I want you to think about when it comes to this section, when was the last time that you asked somebody how they experienced working with you? So if you are on a team of people right now, especially if it's a team that's brought together and not always together, this is a great opportunity to just get some feedback from your peers and say, hey, what was this experience like? What did I do really well? Where can I improve? You know, some people will answer it, some people won't, but at least you're putting yourself out there and trying to understand how people are viewing you and your reputation in the organization. Okay, our reputation can be internal to the organization, but it is also external, and we have to be aware of both. And I will tell you, I see so many people that have an amazing external reputation because they've built that really, really well and really strategically, and their internal reputation is garbage, okay? And so I want you to be aware of that for yourself because that might be a gap that you have in terms of your intention and what's actually being experienced. So one thing I want you to think about, your internal reputation. So this is within your organization. This is going to impact promotions, stretch assignments, and then just that informal influence that we have where we're brought into strategic conversations, right? And so if you're not getting any of those things, then we have to look at your internal reputation and what is going on and how can we build that a little bit more. Now, some organizations don't have space for you to do any of those things. And so you need to understand that as well. This is part of your realistic reality of understanding what's possible in your organization, in your position, and with the manager that you have. For some of you, it's really locked in. This isn't the place for you to grow, and you know that. And so then you take steps to leave if that's what you want to do, or you're fine with what you're doing and you stay there. So external reputation is going to impact recruiter outreach. I know some of you think that that doesn't happen, but it does. Recruiters absolutely will scour places like LinkedIn to find people to bring into their organization or to interview. So you want to have an external reputation that allows for that. For most people, it's going to be LinkedIn. And I know some of you hate that, but it just is what it is. You can do LinkedIn well, especially if you're in a niche area. That works a little bit easier. Speaking opportunities. So are you being asked to speak? Are you doing podcasts? Are you on panels? Are you asked to do industry events? This is when you know that you have a really strong external reputation. And sometimes your reputation is tied to your title or your organization. And you know what? Take that. Take that and run with it. If you have a really well-known organization behind you, then leverage that as much as you can and be the person externally that they want to connect with, whether you're at that organization or not. So definitely pull that lever of influence when you can. Your external reputation can also influence client work. So depending on the type of work that you do, you might get clients that come to you because of something that you have done externally. I know for me, being a business owner, that matters. Anytime that I do things externally, there is potential for people to see me and want to work with me. And so I have to be really cognizant of that external reputation. And then I think more important than anything else is your industry credibility. So those of you who are really strategic about being part of professional associations and just groups related to your industry, your function, whatever it might be, I think those are the people that have external reputation leveraged really, really well. And you can start this early in your career, which I recommend. But that's a lot of times where I see opportunities come from as well, because you are showing people who you are outside of your organization. And I've seen a lot of situations. I saw this earlier in my career in higher education where people hated their jobs. They hated their jobs. They hated where they were at. And they used these external opportunities and these industry events to help build their credibility so that they could get out in a way that wasn't them quitting because they hated the job, because the field was so small and they didn't want to have that negative reputation. So I think leveraging the industry, the external connections, any events that you can go to, I think is something that really helps build that external reputation in a really intentional way that is also going to influence the experience that people have for you. I think one thing to think about is if you do not have a strong internal credibility and combine that with some external presence, you're not going to be able to move up. So it almost has to be a both and. And for some of you, the internal credibility is the best within your organization. But if you also want to move outside of that organization, you have to have a good combination of both, because you have to have people that understand what you do, that are talking about you when you're not in the room. Okay. This is all about visibility. If you are not being visible, people don't know you, they can't trust you. So it's really bringing all of these components together so that you're building a really strong reputation internally, if that's what you want to do, and then externally as well. So I want you to reflect for me on your current internal and external reputations. So does your external presence reflect the level of capability that you are actually operating at internally, and vice versa? Okay. So we need to understand where we are at. Some of us have a really good external image and a poor internal image. So often I see people who have a really strong external image and a poor internal image, and it works out well if they want to leave, but if they're trying to promote within their organization, they question why. And then I have people who have a really strong internal reputation, and so they do really well at one organization, but that's all they focus on. They don't focus on the external reputation. So if they get to a point where they want to leave or something happens, they're let go, whatever it might be, they don't have the external reputation to help them with that transition. So you really do have to be thinking about both, and what does that look like for you in your career right now. Okay. One thing about managing your reputation is it is really about clarity. I cannot stress that enough. Your reputation is about clarity and then also consistency. So what are you known for? There are a lot of things that I could be known for in my business, in my career, in my reputation. But I have been very intentional about crafting what I want people to know and how I want them to know about me. And now I'm doubling down on that with a book. And so that is really who I'm going to be known as once that book comes out. And so that's something that I have been curating for years so that I can tell people this is who I am. And then when they go to my social media, when they go to my website, they see it reinforced so they're not questioning. So clarity and consistency is part of how you are going to manage your reputation well. Okay, so let's break that down a little bit more. What do you want to be known for? I started my career in graphic design, communication, and marketing. And that's part of how I got my first career coaching job, because I had a dual position. But then when I switched into my next position, I really minimized all of that work because I didn't want to be known for that anymore. So where I leveraged it for one position, I took it out for another position and really minimized it. So you have to decide, what do you want to be known for? This is something that I got to put a little plug in here. If you want some more clarity around that, my clarity of self option, I think, is actually really helpful. And I've worked with a lot of people to help figure out what do you want to be known for, and then what skills and traits, and personality traits do you have that describe who you are. So just think about that. So in order to kind of decide what you want to be known for, it's helpful to identify what you are currently known for. And that doesn't mean that that's the thing that you have to be known for. So a lot of times we fall into skills and qualities because we do happen to be very good at them, but we don't want to do them anymore. We don't want to be known for them. So then you have to manage the expectation and you have to shift away from that, which actually can be very challenging for a lot of people. You have to recognize the bias. We talked about this earlier in the episode. You have to understand where bias might exist. You have to understand in your current situation, in your industry, in your function, where there might be some bias and how it could potentially impact you. And then you make a decision on what you're going to do about it, if anything. For some of you, you're not going to do anything. But for others of you, you might take steps to change or to find cultures that fit better, organizations that fit better for you, depending on what biases you do see. And then also, when you're managing your reputation, I think deciding whether or not it's worth it to change your behavior. I think this is a really hard decision to make because sometimes we want to stay in an organization for a particular reason. This is a lot of times a values conflict. I really do not recommend changing yourself dramatically. I felt like I had to change myself a lot for the environment, for some of the environments that I was in, and I ended up leaving those environments. So if you feel like you have changed or you have to change to fit the environment, I would encourage you to start looking for a different environment. I think that is really the best option. But if you've noticed that your behavior has changed, then you want to document how and decide whether or not that change is okay and whether or not you can manage it. Because some of you are working outside of your preferences and that is draining your energy a lot. So that's just something to actually think about. Okay, for managing your reputation, I want to give you some specific action steps, kind of wrapping up this section. So I want you to write down 3 words that you want associated with your name. Again, I'm going to make a plug for clarity of self. That's something I do to help people do that. Then I want you to ask 2 trusted colleagues how they would currently describe you. So this is somebody that's working with you right now, not somebody that worked with you 5 or 10 years ago. I want you to compare those lists. And I want you to identify a behavior that you want to adjust first, okay? And identify one area where your environment, not your behavior, might be the real issue. So I want you to really take a step back on this and dig into, what do I want to be known for? What do I want to double down with that's consistent across these 2 lists? And then also recognize, again, the environmental influence and what that could look like. All right. Remember, reputation develops through repeated behavior and different opportunities that we get throughout our career, especially when change or crisis is involved in some way. It is usually going to be influenced long before any kind of formal promotion or opportunity happens. You have to get on top of your reputation very early, especially if you have been with an organization or want to stay with an organization long term. You can't control everything. I know my whole thing is control your career. And yes, we do want to do that, but you cannot control other people. You cannot control their bias. And in a lot of ways, you can't control the culture that you're a part of. So what you can do is you can look at the patterns in your behavior, and you can decide if those patterns and the behavior and the traits that you are bringing to the table work for you and work for that environment. So again, take time this week to think about who you are, what's associated with you, who are you associated with, all of those things. Get that comparison, and then really do a good look at your reputation internally as well as externally. I want you to focus on reinforcement where you know that you have some positive levers to pull. And then also just come to terms with the fact that there are some things that you can't control, and you have to make a decision of whether or not it's worth it to stay because of those things. There are behaviors you can change that make sense for the environment in order to bolster that reputation. So make your choices on what that's going to be for you. Remember, this does not have to be big changes. We can make small little changes in order to influence how people view us in the future. All right. Next episode, we are going to be talking, I think, about visibility, or some version of that at this point. We are going to look at how you communicate your work in a way that strengthens your credibility without feeling performative. We're really trying to push against any type of performative behavior. We want everything to be authentic. We want to build that credibility. So we are going to continue on that vein in the next episode. If this was useful, please subscribe to the show so that you don't miss another episode. And if there's somebody that you know that could use this reputation talk, please share this episode with them. And I did reference quite a few things in this episode, and that is going to be linked into the blog post and show notes for this episode, so you can check that out if you want to dig a little bit deeper. I will see you next time, and remember, you control your career.